In the previous video, we saw that basic applications are created of pages, particularly a content page. That content page contains a layout, which then in turn may contain other layouts or certainly views. The views are the controls that the user interacts with. So we talked about input, process, and output views. And I've created an application. I'm running both on an iOS simulator and an Android emulator. So you can see the differences. And I want to go through each of the different views. You need to have an idea of what is possible in .NET MAUI, and that's what I hope to achieve in this lesson. So let's start with the input views. By the way, I created a tabbed page that has tabs for input views, process views, and output views. So on the iOS side, it's at the bottom. On the Android, it's at the top. And we can change this and have it be at the bottom for Android if we wanted. But the default is at the top. I mentioned that the great thing about MAUI is it compiles the shared XAML UI so that each object looks like an object on that platform. And so we'll see some differences between iOS and Android and how it interacts on some of these things as well. So let's go through the input views. So this is an entry view. An entry view allows one line of entry. So the user can enter into that line. An editor is a multi-line entry. And as you can see, it automatically wraps. Then we have checkboxes. Checkboxes allow us to choose more than one item. And our square, except for on iOS, for whatever reason, they are round. However, notice here on the iOS side, I can choose more than one. This is contrasting to a radio button, in which they're music exclusive. You can only choose one item at a time. A slider allows us to select a range of values between a minimum and a maximum. A stepper allows us to increase or decrease using the buttons here. Notice the difference in appearance between iOS and Android. Let me get rid of my keyboard. The switch allows us to turn something on or off. And here I've just coded it to change the color of the background of the page. A date picker for Android brings up a calendar, and I can choose the date. If I wanted to go back in years, it gives me a little scroller here. I can go back in years. May want to go back to 2009 and change this to November 16th or 19th. And when I click OK, we'll see that date appear in the date picker. The time picker allows me to choose a time, an hour, and then a minute. Maybe I want to do 4:45, and I want this to be PM. Click OK, and I get 4:45 PM. And then a picker allows me to suggest items to be chosen from. So I may want to choose Golden Retriever, and that appears in the picker. Now I want to show you the differences on the iOS side because they are very different. The date picker brings up picker at the bottom where we can choose a date and a year and click done, and that appears in the field. And then the time picker kind of works the same way. I can say I want to do maybe 10:30. And make that AM. And then for our picker, we simply get a picker at the bottom. And again, I can choose an item, click done, and that's going to appear in the field. So those are the input views. Let's take a look at the process views. So we have buttons. The buttons are the primary process views that we use, or at least that I use. And you can style them differently. Each of these buttons does the same thing. I just have it basically go through some differences of background colors. It comes back to white. This one does the exact same thing. And I want to show you could do a button that just simply looked like text. And then we can use image buttons. So I created this button in Photoshop. I created both a normal view and a view where it's being pressed in and changes the background. Now actually, the pressed in view on the iOS side doesn't work very well. Let's look at it on the Android. So what I did is I swapped the gradient and had it recess in a bit. But I coded that simply to add a gradient background. A search bar allows us to search for an item, and here I tied it to a list view of all the films of Jimmy Stewart. And we could search for man, and we get the Murder Man, the Thin Man, of Human Hearts, that's where man's coming in, the Man from Laramie, the Man Who Knew Too Much, the Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. If I simply click the X button here, I'll go back to all of the films of Jimmy Stewart. And then we have swipe views. Swipe views are a way of kind of saving some real estate space, I suppose. We can swipe to the right and choose the answer to, do we like Brussels sprouts? If you say yes, I simply coded it to make it green. If you chose no, coded it that color. If you wanted to clear, you can swipe to the left and clear. Those are our basic process views. Again, buttons are going to be the primary tool that we use. Let's take a look at the outputs. Now we have a lot of output views, so I created this in a scroll view so that we could scroll through all the different items that are there. Labels are very common output views that we'll use. We'll use labels simply for identifying information to the user, thus the name label. But while the user cannot change the text of a label, we can do so programmatically and use them as changeable outputs. So I can use the click me button to say labels are read only, but can be used for output. The collection view allows us to scroll through items in a list. I set up a class for the individuals in the Phoenix Suns Ring of Honor, hard-coded them in. There's only 15, but we can scroll through the list and we can click on an item and see information about that person. The refresh view allows me to pull down from the top of the page and have it refresh the data. Let's pretend the data is coming from a server that's being updated in real time. We want to make sure we have the most recent information. So now we've gone from 15 people in the Ring of Honor to 16. And as we scroll through the list, we're going to see that, oh wait, I've been added to the Ring of Honor. I am so honored. As a fan, from 1975 to present, we can click on the information and see information about me added to that list. That's a refresh view. Let's take a look at the list view. The list view works very similar to the collection view. It's actually kind of the older version. And these are all novels from my favorite author, David Rosenfeld. We can click on one of the titles and see the image. I also added a little Easter egg where we click on the title of the list view and it shows the author with my dog, Serenity Grace, back from 2019. Table views are similar. We can click an item and see more information about the course shown in the label below. A carousel view allows us to scroll through items by swiping and look at images, and I have added text here. And below that is an indicator view that shows where we're at in the order of images. Right now I'm looking at the third image. And I can go both forwards, I can also go backwards. And it's like a circular Rolodex. When you go backwards from the first item, you'll be at the last item. A progress bar is used to show that a process is running. Maybe we know how long this process is, and so we can keep track of the progress through 100%. Let me run that again. And of course, you can change the colors of these things. The activity indicator is used when we want to have a process that's running, but we don't know how long it's going to take. Maybe we're trying to connect to a web server somewhere. There's not necessarily a progress from 0% to 100%, we're just waiting. By the way, we can change the color of that activity indicator. A box view simply draws a box, and I often use these for spacing and make them the same color as the background so you don't really see them, but we can change the color. We could use it as some type of indicator if we wanted. Here's a box view that's just blue that I use sort of as a separator. Images are very common. Of course, we live in a visual age. And so here I create a little dice roller, 2 images of dice, and we can roll the dice. Borders and frames can be used with all kinds of objects. I use them here with an image. We can place a border around an image. We can change the roundness of corners. We can do things like drop shadows. Borders and frames are pretty much the same thing. Borders are newer than frames, and most likely, probably eventually, frames will go away and we'll simplify things just with borders. We can now draw shapes. Rectangles, ellipses, lines, polylines, polygons, and paths. Of course, all kinds of attributes in terms of color, width of lines, and so forth. Dashed lines on a rectangular ellipse. We can add in maps. And this is just a mock-up of a map showing South Mountain Community College. The maps are interactive. You do have to get an account with Google Maps because that's what's used in Android. A little bit extra steps there, but it's free and not that difficult to do. We also have something called a graphics view. The graphics view allows us to programmatically draw things in the graphics view. Now I'm going to point you to a couple of YouTube videos by Programming with Chris. In the first one, he creates a clock that is in real time. And then in the second video, he's creating these dials that show values that are also interactive. That's not necessarily my skill set. That might be yours. And so I invite you to learn from Programming with Chris in that case. Blazor is a pretty exciting thing happening in C#. Blazor is a way to create web pages, both front end and web server back ends, with C# rather than using, say, JavaScript on a web page. And a popular thing right now is to create MAUI Blazor hybrids. And so you're going to see when you set up a project, one of the options is a MAUI Blazor hybrid project. That's not what this project is, so I'm just, again, doing an image mockup, but this could be a live Blazor web page that we could interact with. In the same vein, we have a web view that we can use that is interactive in this case. I'm going to the South Mountain web page. I can, since it's updating here in real time, I can click on the menu. I can go to About, get information there. Let's get rid of the cookies. So that is interactive, just loading a web page into your MAUI application. There's also a content view I didn't cover here. Content views allow us to create our own custom views and are pretty involved. We may or may not have a chance to look at those in this course. So those are the views that we currently have. You may see some views added in. These are more views than what Xamarin used to have, especially when I started with Xamarin. The collection view became fairly new in Xamarin in the last few years. Blazor Web View, of course, is very new. And we will use most of these views probably over the course of the semester. If you just jumped into this video, you can see all the videos from the .NET MAUI Practicum playlist by clicking on the image in the lower right. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos I create, you can click my picture in the top right to subscribe to the channel.